I'm going to try to just draw some connections in 5 minutes between why we trust science and why we should trust the legal system in light of the recent, you might have heard of, probably wrongful conviction and recent pardon of Kathleen Folbigg. So very briefly, after that, I'll have to talk about this very bluntly just to get through it quickly, but it's extremely tragic situation. So Kathleen Folbigg was, you might know, pardoned a few months ago. She was convicted in 2003 of the death of her 4 children. They were essentially cot deaths. They were unexplained, and the evidence for her conviction was always pretty weak. There was expert evidence saying that there probably wasn't, there weren't any innocent causes that they could see, which is not very strong evidence. There were purported admissions in her diary, which I think now look very equivocal, but at the time the jury and judges seem to have thought were quite profound, like her saying that she had learned her lesson, but that could mean anything, right? And the jury was told that it's okay to reason that if there's multiple things that happen for an unexplained cause, it might be because of her. So there were a lot of appeals, an inquiry, a second inquiry, and eventually she was pardoned in 2003 after the second inquiry heard evidence that there was likely genetic evidence that could explain the deaths of 2 of the children. So I think in light of this, it's sort of reasonable to think, can we really trust the legal system to come to accurate outcomes? And the main reason, this is a prominent judge, James Spiegelman, one of the main reasons that judges and practitioners say that we can trust the legal system is because of the adversarial system. It's one of the greatest mechanisms for the identification of truth that's ever been devised, which is, I think, very vacuous statement. It's like, just trust that 2 parties duel it out, we'll get to the right answer. But I think it's very interesting that very similar reasons are given for trusting science, right? Science depends on a social process, organized distrust. No one trusts each other. Eventually, the truth comes out. Samin Vazir has mentioned this in talks. I've kind of stolen it from her, stole this from her and James Heathers. Yeah, it works, but why? Why does it work? And can we identify particular reasons for that? And Samin and Alex have said, well, let's be a little more concrete about this. What are the actual mechanisms that we can observe to see why we should trust science? How many minutes left?
1.5.
Oh, shoot. So they say, well, let's actually try to be a little more concrete and like, what are the actual reasons we trust science and can we actually verify?
Sorry, 2.5.
Self-correction.
I'll slow down a little bit. And they say, well, we can break those down into transparency. So can you actually verify findings, and then critical appraisal? Does it actually happen? And so I tried to kind of I basically borrowed from them. I said, can we do a similar thing in law? So what are the observable manifestations of, the adversarial system being the greatest mechanism for truth? And in law, what are things like that? I won't have time to get into these things. Is one of these a power? Things like, do the rules of evidence require transparency so the parties actually can assess and test the evidence? And if a prosecutor doesn't disclose the evidence, are they actually held accountable for that? And then are there actual mechanisms to discover that, like after that's been out, like are there reasons to think that the parties are actually critically appraising things? If there is an error, or like how many inquiries happen? Is there a review commission that will actually go through and try to find errors? Does a prosecution and police have to keep the file so that you can find errors later on? And just very briefly, in light of Folbigg's case, I think it's very interesting that in the 20 years since she was convicted, the rules have gotten weaker. So this is maybe a reason not to trust it. But I think these inquiries are a reason to trust science because there's an ethic involved. There's people actually trying to find errors and mechanisms for doing that. And that's the end. Shinichi's about to kick me off, but my slides are available there, and these are some of the references that I used. Thanks for your attention.
Next up is
Taya.
Taya. But you have
But thank you for the chance to present. This work was written up on the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. Strong program, Sociology of Scientific Knowledge. What could it do for you? Let's find out in 5 minutes. I cannot do this paradigm justice in 5 minutes. Please take this as a too rapid introduction to a unique, controversial, but analytically fruitful perspective on science. Science is choice making. Scientific writing is choice making. And those choices occur within sociocultural contexts. Whether we like it or not, the norms governing proper use of scientific methods are socially determined and socially sustained. There's like 60 years of work in science studies that repeatedly makes this conclusion. But there's very limited work in the population health sciences where I work that is focused on the cultural drivers of scientific practice, research practice in particular. So that's where the STRONG program comes in for me. I like it because it obliges me to zoom out and to question individualised accounts of scientific practice and malpractice. It also supports me to ask unique styles of questions about the factors that shape knowledge construction in epidemiology and public health. I'm a statistician, a biostatistician, and a lot of research in my area unfolds according to this framework. We begin with a large quantity of scientific output addressing a particular topic or using a particular method. Then by some process, we sort that into the good and the bad, into the correct and the incorrect. Then we describe in detail the extent of the bad and the incorrect, and that's the end of the study. I don't want to minimise the value of this work or the importance and the impact of this work, but fundamentally this is descriptive work and is not a path to grappling with cultural causes of practice. So what I wish is that we had a parallel and complementary stream of work that looked a bit more like this, that explicitly positions knowledge claims and belief as existing within a cultural system that's comprised of both broad scientific cross-cutting cultural factors and local cultural factors and departmental or institutional norms. The STRONG program, though historically quite challenging, is a road to such work. It's an empirical and naturalistic approach defined by 4 methodological tenets outlined by David Bloor in 1976. I've arranged them here in increasing order of historical controversy, but the main idea is to get how scientific work proceeds in the real world and what scientists believe they are doing. I've got probably 2.5 minutes, so let's hit it. The first tenet is that STRONG program work is causal. It is empirical work that is concerned with the conditions which bring about belief or knowledge. The description of belief or knowledge does not cut it. We have to go a step further and consider the cultural conditions surrounding that practice. And that includes but isn't limited to social causes. Secondly, STRONG program work is reflexive. It is not permissible to exclude yourself from your findings or your lab from your findings or your discipline. And I like that that's in black and white in this framework. STRONG program work is impartial with respect to the correctness, rationality or success of knowledge claims. This is where it gets interesting. So claims which are wrong are not more interesting sociologically than claims which are right. This doesn't mean that I don't believe truth exists. I do believe truth exists, but what this means is that the wrongness and the rightness is not at the centre of the architecture of my analysis. We put that to the side and instead we ask about those cross-cutting cultural factors. And finally, STRONG program work is symmetrical in explanation. The same causes, including social causes, must explain both good and bad science, both true and false statements. There are not special causes of bad science. And I'm aware that this is a controversial statement in a lot of contexts, but within the STRONG program, the same variables are understood to be at play in all scientific contexts. But they take different values in specific contexts, they intersect with individual characteristics and local nuances to produce specific practice and knowledge claims. And I have Superman here because I think sometimes we act as though labs producing bad work have like a lump of kryptonite in the basement and the kryptonite labs are doing the bad work and we are like not involved at all in whatever process that is. STRONG program framework, it forces us to consider a reality where we're all a part of the same cultural system and that system is interacting with local characters and local cultural factors to generate, shall we say, diversity in practice. Thank you very much for the chance to present. I look forward to chatting with you all during the conference.
Zuduo.
Start. Yeah, good.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. In the next 5 minutes or so, I wish to share some personal experience of promoting reproducible research in transportation research community and share some personal lessons with you guys I have learned so far. So I started paying attention to reproducibility in 2015. I noticed the importance of reproducibility, and I was very much surprised to notice that in my research community, almost no one paid much attention to this important issue. So I decided to do something about it. So I started something called Rewrite Campaign, stands for Reproducible Research in Transport Engineering. To kick off this campaign, I developed a very simple web page, okay, as you can see here. And then I started educating myself about benefits and opportunities and challenges and some useful tools for conducting reproducible research in my research community. And then I started writing a paper about that, and this paper eventually published in 2023. Actually, I finished writing this paper in 2019. It took me a long time to get it published. And then, working with the two collaborators, we published this paper in a top journal in my discipline. And this paper, in my opinion, is the first reproducible paper in our discipline. And then in 2023, I coordinated a call for papers and also a podium session focused on promoting reproducible research in my research community at the annual meeting of TRB. For you, most of you guys, you don't know what's TRB. TRB is the oldest and biggest conference in my discipline. Every year, it attracts more than 12,000 participants from all over the world. So this podium session is the first event focused on reproducible research in the 100-year history of TRB. So I was pretty proud of this. And currently, I'm coordinating the organization of a workshop for TRB, for the 2024 TRB annual meeting. So what I have learned from these activities so far. So to start with, imposter syndrome. I face this imposter syndrome because when I started paying attention to this important topic, I was still at the early stage of my career. So from time to time, I question myself, am I qualified for this important task? Maybe some of these big names, they can do better job instead of me. This is the first obstacle. Then the second one is procrastination. And maybe this partly due to maybe imposter syndrome. So knowingly or unknowingly, I always postpone actions related to promoting reproducible research because I always find some more urgent, more important tasks to do. That's part of the reason why the first event I organized about promoting reproducible research didn't happen until 2022. A long time. Then the next lesson I found that it's really important to find a passionate and reliable collaborator. And in the beginning, I reached out to many researchers in my discipline. Many of them responded yes, because promoting reproducible research, what a great idea. And plus, if I said no to this kind of request, and you might think, okay, I'm not a good researcher because I don't care about reproducibility of my research. However, very few actually are willing to put extra time and effort into doing something about it. And fortunately for me, I found a very good collaborator, Dr. Christine Bosson from France. And for all these events I mentioned 1 moment ago, and I did it together with her. So although she's not here today, I just want to give a big shout out to Christine. And the next one, over these years, I have realized that this is, when it comes to promoting reproducible research, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I have to manage my expectations. It's okay people said no to my request. It's okay not many people show up to my workshop. And as long as I'm doing something regularly, As long as I have a long-term commitment with a long-term plan, I'm okay. So that's it. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Accept the.
Thanks. So I'm Kylie Hunter from the University of Sydney. Really great to be here today to present on responsibilities for receiving and using individual participant data from trials in health research. And this project actually was conducted at AIMOS 2 years ago, and very recently we got it published. So that's exciting news. So, what is data sharing? It's the practice of making data generated by studies available for use by other researchers. So on the left here, we have the data provider who generates the data by conducting a study. And when I say data, I mean individual participant data. So that's the raw row by row data for each participant within a study. And then we have the data recipient. This is like myself, this is an AI version of me. We request and receive research study data for various purposes, such as reproducibility studies, secondary analyses, and in the case of myself and my team, individual participant data meta-analysis. And this can help to generate new knowledge from existing data, enhance credibility of existing findings, and so maximising investment from previously funded projects. So, individual participant data meta-analyses can be really impactful. If you don't believe me, this is a recent one that we conducted where we brought together 48 trials, including data from more than 6,000 participants, and found that just waiting a few minutes before clamping the cord at preterm birth can reduce the risk of death. And this is AIMOS member and a colleague Lena here talking to the news a few days ago. So I guess data sharing can be really impactful ways like this. But even though there is strong in principle support for data sharing, in practice, the data are often really difficult to find, access and reuse. So there are several barriers to this. In particular, we often struggle with ethical requirements and participant confidentiality. We often have data providers that are very happy to share their data, but the ethics committee may not let them do that. So we found ourselves getting really frustrated. Why won't you give us the data? And we thought, well, how can we as data recipients help to address some of these barriers? So, as I said, a couple of years ago, we did a focus group at AIMOS, and with the aim to assess views on the responsibilities of recipients of IPD, and we discussed these 3 common data sharing scenarios. And then we recorded the session and did a thematic analysis. So we had 16 conference delegates attend the focus group, some of whom I think are here today. And we identified 4 cross-cutting themes: privacy and ethics, capability and resourcing, recognition and collaboration, and compliance. And this is a busy figure. I don't expect you to read it, but just if you want to read it, it's in the publication. But just to show that across each stage of the health research cycle, we identified several responsibilities. I'll just go through a few key ones here. So at the design stage, it's really important to share data management plans and ethics approval with the data provider. So even though ethics isn't necessarily required, we always make sure we do get approval. And we always offer the data provider an opportunity to collaborate and provide input into the protocol right from the beginning of the study, the project. At the conduct stage, we requested the identified data in the least effort format. And we ask for that with the data dictionary and hope and pray that the data are decipherable, but if not, we go back and forth to make sure we understand the data. At the analysis stage, it's important to demonstrate requisite clinical knowledge, data management and skills. So we always prepare a very detailed statistical analysis plan and share that with the data provider and they can provide input. At the reporting stage, we offer the provider the opportunity to review and provide input into the results and offer co-authorship if appropriate. And that's why sometimes the author list can be quite long, but we think that this really contributes to the quality and impact of the project. And lastly, we need to make our secondary data set available to reuse as well. So in conclusion, health research is a huge investment of funding and time and participant trust, and reusing data such as this can maximise this investment. It has advantages to both the data provider and the data recipient, and we think that adhering to some of these responsibilities that we've outlined may facilitate increased data sharing. Thank you.
Last speaker, yeah. Olmo.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Olmo van den Akker. I'm based at the Quest Center for Responsible Research in Berlin. And I also just handed in my PhD dissertation about pre-registration in psychology. So if you want to know if that's a good solution to the replication crisis, come talk to me in the break, because this talk is about something else, my work in Berlin, the ethics and transparency of patient registries. And the background is that routine patient data is becoming more and more available through databases like these, the Clinical Practice Research Data Link, and Open Safely. So this is routinely collected patient data from hospitals and primary care physicians, for example, to be used for research. And there's luckily also more ethical guidance for the use of this data. For example, the Declaration of Taipei addresses this, but also other sources. And we use these sources to come up with a checklist to assess patient registries. So we have 6 themes: governance, how registries are governed; conflicts of interest, how they are funded; informed consent, do they discuss with their patients things like their consent and privacy of individual patients; use and access policies is about the conditions that users must abide by to be able to use the data; and there's research transparency, which is things like registration, reporting, and code sharing, for example. So what we did is we had a checklist, and we looked at websites of patient registries to see whether they discuss these things or not. So we had 68 registries from the NSAP database, which is kind of database of databases. We coded 55 so far, so it's a work in progress still. And only 31 had actually websites with sufficient relevant info, so that cut our sample size short a little bit. And these are the results. So regarding governance, about half of the registries stated that they had some kind of governance, a steering committee, for example, or a governing body. But of those, only 4 actually provided the task of individual members of that committee, which is important to know. Conflicts of interest, so also about half provided information about how they were funded, but almost none of them actually provided details about the influence of these financiers on the registry, which is of course the most important thing when it comes to conflicts of interest. Informed consent, so luckily most of the registries provided information specifically tailored to patients about how they can consent, and more information about the registry itself and what their data will contribute to. So like basic thing to inform about is the aims of the registry. What is your data being used for? Many registries did include this information. Other things, not so much. So the benefits of participating for patients, the risks of participating for patients were not discussed that much. And luckily, many websites did include that patients can withdraw their consent. And this is important because it's necessary for a lot of privacy guidelines and requirements. And privacy, most of the registries provide information about privacy to patients, which is important, but not all of them provide an actual data security protocol. So the way they actually ensure security of the patient data. Use and access, so 18 of the 31 registries provided their user access policy or procedure. 9 of the 18, so about half of the ones that had a procedure, included a methodological review, and 11 included an ethical review. Then research transparency, so almost all of them provide an overview of the publications, so the results were shared. Then the bad news, so only 5 out of the 31 registries required pre-registration. None of them required description of the methodology in publications based on the data. 10 registries required users to report the study results, which is shockingly low, I would say. And none of them required code sharing. So these are low numbers, I think. So to conclude, the NSAT database should be updated more regularly because we were not able to use all of the registries in there. And in general, to properly inform patients and data users about ethics and transparency, registries should provide more information based on existing guidelines. So next step is assessing actual registry practices, because we now only looked at websites and what they say themselves, what they do, but do they actually do this? We don't know, so we're going to contact the registries themselves to see what they actually do.